What if the very thing you are trying so hard to become is being pushed further away by the effort itself? You may believe that transformation begins when you improve yourself, fix yourself, discipline yourself, or finally become the version of you who deserves the life you desire. But what if that entire approach is built on a hidden illusion? What if the more you try to become someone else, the more you reinforce the silent belief that who you are right now is not enough? This is where reality begins to respond in a very subtle way. Not to your words, not to your wishes, not even to your vision board. Reality responds to the identity you are embodying beneath all of it. And if your deepest energy says, "I am not there yet," then life keeps reflecting a version of reality where fulfillment remains just out of reach. This is why some people chase love and feel more unseen. They chase success and feel more behind. They chase peace and feel more anxious. Not because life is against them, but because they are creating from the identity of lack. The hidden paradox is this: what you want does not come when you force yourself to become worthy of it. It begins to move toward you when you stop worshiping the identity that says you are incomplete. And this is where the real journey begins. Have you ever stopped to ask yourself who is actually making your decisions? Not the version of you that sets goals at night, full of clarity and intention, but the version that shows up in the moment. The one that reacts, hesitates, overthinks, or pulls back just when things start to shift. Where does that version come from? Most people believe they are consciously directing their lives. But what if the truth is far more subtle and far more powerful? What if your life is being run by an identity you didn't consciously choose? From early experiences, your mind began forming patterns. Not just beliefs, but entire emotional blueprints about who you are, what you deserve, and how the world responds to you. These patterns didn't ask for your permission. They were absorbed, repeated, and reinforced until they became familiar, and then they became you. So when you say, "I want something different," but your internal identity still holds the imprint of "this is who I am," reality doesn't follow your desire. It follows your identity. This is why change can feel so frustrating. You're not just trying to create a new outcome. You're attempting to override a deeply practiced version of yourself that feels natural, automatic, and strangely safe. And here's the part most people never realize. Your identity is not fixed. It's practiced, which means if it was learned, it can be unlearned. But before that happens, you need to see it clearly. If this perspective is opening something inside you, take a moment to subscribe and like the video. It helps bring this message to those who need it most. What if nothing in your life is actually stuck and everything is simply repeating? At first, that idea can feel uncomfortable because stuck sounds temporary, like something external that will eventually change. But repeating, that points somewhere deeper, somewhere internal, somewhere within your own patterns. Think about it carefully. Different situations, same emotional outcomes. Different people, same dynamics. New goals, same resistance. It's almost as if life is reshuffling the characters and the circumstances, but the core experience remains unchanged. Why does this happen? Because your nervous system is not designed to seek happiness. It is designed to seek familiarity. And what is familiar, even if painful, feels predictable. And what is predictable feels safe. So, without realizing it, you're not choosing what is best for you. You are choosing what matches the identity you've been rehearsing. This is why someone can say they want a healthy relationship, but feel drawn to emotional inconsistency. Why someone wants success, but procrastinates when opportunity appears. Why someone wants peace, but keeps feeding thoughts that create inner chaos. It's not a lack of desire. It's a loop of identity. And here's where it becomes powerful. Once you recognize that you're not stuck, you're repeating, something shifts. Because repetition can be interrupted, but only when it becomes visible. So the real question is no longer, why is this happening to me? The real question becomes, what part of me is recreating this? What if your life is not unfolding randomly, but confirming something you already believe to be true? At first, this idea can feel almost unsettling, because it suggests that the patterns you experience are not accidents, coincidences, or bad timing, but reflections. Not reflections of what you say you want, but reflections of what you assume you are. This is the principle most people overlook. Reality does not organize itself around your preferences. It organizes itself around your identity. If, deep within, you carry the imprint, I am not chosen, life will subtly arrange moments that echo that feeling, not as punishment, but as coherence. If your internal state says, I am always behind, opportunities may appear, but you won't recognize them, act on them, or sustain them in a way that changes your trajectory. Because the mind filters reality through identity. It selects, distorts, and interprets everything in a way that confirms what feels true. This is why two people can experience the same event and walk away with completely different meanings. One sees possibility. The other sees limitation. The event is the same, but the identity interpreting it is not. And over time, this creates a powerful illusion. This is just how life is. But what if life isn't fixed? What if it's responding, not to your effort, not to your control, but to your internal alignment? If that's true, then changing your reality isn't about forcing new outcomes. It's about becoming aware of the identity that keeps recreating the same ones. And once you see that, you can no longer unsee it. What if the very patterns you say you want to escape are the ones your system is trying to protect? It sounds contradictory, almost unsettling. Why would anyone hold on to something that causes frustration, disappointment, or even pain? But beneath every repeating pattern, there is something deeper than logic. There is familiarity. And to your nervous system, familiarity feels like safety. Even if a pattern is limiting, even if it keeps you small, even if it quietly drains your energy, if it is known, it is predictable. And if it is predictable, your system relaxes into it because it knows how to survive there. This is why change can feel so uncomfortable, even when it's exactly what you want. Because the moment you begin to move beyond what is familiar, your body doesn't interpret it as growth. It interprets it as uncertainty. And uncertainty, to the nervous system, can feel like danger. So you hesitate. You overthink. You delay. Not because you lack discipline, but because a deeper part of you is trying to pull you back into what it recognizes as safe. This is the hidden comfort no one talks about. The comfort of repeating what you already know, even when it doesn't serve you. And until you see this clearly, you will keep fighting yourself without understanding why. Because it's not that you want the pattern, it's that your system trusts it. And this is where awareness begins to shift everything. What if the discomfort you've been trying to avoid is actually the signal that you're about to change? Most people interpret resistance as a warning. a sign that something is wrong, that they're not ready, or that they should slow down. But what if resistance is not a stop sign but a doorway? Think about the moments when you feel the most internal tension, right before you speak your truth, right before you take a risk, right before you step into something unfamiliar. There's a tightening, a hesitation, almost like an invisible force pulling you back. That feeling is not random. It's the boundary between who you've been and who you are becoming. Your nervous system is designed to maintain what is known. So when you begin to move beyond your current identity, it reacts. It creates discomfort, doubt, and even fear, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're stepping outside the version of you it recognizes. And here's the subtle shift. Resistance doesn't mean stop. It means you're touching something real. The problem is, most people retreat at that exact moment. They interpret the feeling as failure instead of progress. And by doing so, they reinforce the same identity they were trying to move beyond. But what if, instead of stepping back, you stayed present in that tension? What if you allowed yourself to feel it without escaping it? Because on the other side of that resistance is the version of you've been trying to reach. What if the exact feeling you keep trying to escape is the one place your transformation is waiting? Not the comfortable moments, not the times when everything feels aligned and easy, but the quiet, internal tension you've been avoiding, the one that shows up when you're about to be honest, when you're about to outgrow something, when you feel the pull to become more but hesitate. That tension is not a problem. It is information. It's the signal that two versions of you are colliding. The familiar identity that wants to keep you safe, and the emerging self that is ready to expand. And in that collision, something powerful is happening, whether you realize it or not. Most people spend their lives trying to dissolve that tension as quickly as possible. They distract themselves, rationalize their feelings, or retreat back into what feels easier. But in doing so, they miss the doorway entirely, because tension is not meant to be eliminated. It is meant to be entered. When you stay with it, without numbing it, without escaping it, you begin to access something deeper than reaction. You begin to observe. And in that observation, space opens. This is where your power begins to return. Not through force, not through control, but through presence. Because the moment you stop running from tension, you stop reinforcing the identity that fears it. And for the first time, you begin to meet yourself without distortion. That is the real doorway. And once you step into it, nothing feels the same again. What if the reason you feel disconnected isn't because you've lost yourself, but because you've learned to hide who you are? Not consciously, not intentionally, but gradually over time. There was a moment, maybe many moments, when expressing your true thoughts, your emotions, your natural way of being didn't feel safe. Maybe it wasn't accepted. Maybe it was misunderstood. Maybe it was ignored. And in those moments, something subtle happened. You adapted. You learned which parts of you were welcomed and which parts created tension. And without realizing it, you began shaping yourself around that feedback. You softened certain truths. You held back certain emotions. You filtered your expression, not because you wanted to, but because it felt necessary. And slowly, that filtered version of you became your identity. But here's the cost no one talks about. Every time you suppress what is real within you, you create internal friction, a quiet misalignment between what you feel and what you show. And over time, that misalignment doesn't just stay emotional, it becomes energetic. You begin to feel stuck, not because you lack direction, but because your energy is divided.
Part of you wants to expand.
Another part is still holding back, protecting the version of you that learned how to belong. This is why even success can feel empty. Because if it's built on a version of you that isn't fully expressed, it never feels fully yours. So the question is not, how do I become more? The question is, what have I been holding back? Because what you've been suppressing may be the very thing that sets you free. What if nothing is truly lost inside you, only stored? Every emotion you silence, every truth you swallow, every impulse you suppress doesn't disappear. It remains, held within your body, your nervous system, your subconscious patterns, waiting for resolution. And over time, that unexpressed energy begins to shape your reality in ways you may not recognize. It shows up as hesitation when you want to speak, as anxiety when you want to move forward, as confusion when you know, deep down, exactly what you feel. It creates a subtle pressure within you, like something is building, but has nowhere to go. This is the invisible cage. Not created by external circumstances, but by the accumulation of everything you didn't allow yourself to express. Because expression is not just communication. It is movement. It is release. It is the natural flow of energy through your system. And when that flow is blocked, stagnation begins. You might try to think your way out of it, plan your way through it, control it. But no strategy can replace what has not been released. And here's the deeper truth. The more you suppress, the more your identity organizes around that suppression. You become the version of yourself that holds back, that filters, that waits. Until one day it feels like that's just who you are. But it isn't. It's simply what has been practiced. And the moment you allow even a small piece of that energy to move, to be seen, to be felt, to be expressed, you begin to loosen the cage. Not by force, but by finally allowing yourself to move again. What if the breakthrough you've been searching for isn't found in doing more, but in finally allowing something to move?
Not a new strategy.
Not another plan. Not a more disciplined version of yourself, but a single, subtle shift that changes the direction of your entire energy, expression. Because everything you've been holding back is still active within you. It's in the thoughts you don't say out loud, the emotions you minimize, the impulses you ignore. And all of that energy doesn't disappear, it accumulates. It builds pressure. And eventually, it begins to shape your experience from behind the scenes. This is why you can feel stuck even when you're doing everything right. Because transformation is not just about what you do externally, it's about what you allow internally. Expression is the release of stored energy. It is the moment when what has been held inside begins to move through you instead of against you. And the moment energy moves, identity begins to shift. Not instantly, not dramatically, but undeniably. You start to feel lighter, clearer, more aligned. Not because your life has changed yet, but because you are no longer divided within yourself. This is the beginning of real change. Not forcing a new version of you into existence, but dissolving what has been blocking your natural state. So the question becomes, where in your life are you still holding back? Because that's not just where your tension is. That's where your transformation begins. What if everything you've been taught about creating results is missing the most important piece? You've been told to plan better, think smarter, stay consistent, control your habits. And while all of that has its place, there's something deeper that determines whether those strategies actually work. Because strategy operates on the surface. Expression operates at the source. You can follow the perfect plan, say the right words, take the right actions, and still feel like something isn't moving. Like you're pushing, but nothing is truly shifting. And that's because strategy without expression is disconnected from your real energy. It becomes mechanical,
Forced.
empty. Expression, on the other hand, is alignment in motion. It's when your thoughts, your emotions, and your actions are no longer filtered through fear or control, but allowed to move freely. And when that happens, something changes in the way reality responds to you. People feel it. Opportunities align with it. Decisions become clearer. Not because you're trying harder, but because you're no longer resisting yourself. This is why some people seem to move effortlessly, while others struggle even with the same knowledge. It's not about intelligence. It's not about effort. It's about coherence. When your internal state is expressed instead of suppressed, your actions carry a different quality. They become direct, clear, and magnetic. So instead of asking, "What should I do next?" ask yourself, "What am I not allowing myself to express?" Because that answer holds more power than any strategy you've been following. What if the version of you that feels so natural was never truly you? What if it was something you learned? From the outside, your personality may seem consistent. The way you respond, the way you communicate, the way you navigate relationships and challenges, it all feels like this is just who I am. But if you look closer, you may begin to see something else. Patterns, predictable reactions, familiar emotional loops, repeated ways of shrinking, pleasing, controlling, or withdrawing. And these patterns didn't appear randomly. They were formed in moments where you had to adapt. As a child, you weren't just growing, you were learning how to belong, how to be accepted, how to feel safe. And in that process, you began shaping a role. Maybe you became the one who keeps the peace, the one who achieves, the one who doesn't ask for too much, the one who holds everything together. At the time, that role served a purpose. It helped you navigate your environment. It helped you receive connection, validation, or even just avoid rejection. But here's what no one tells you. The role doesn't disappear when the environment changes. It stays. It becomes embedded in your identity. It begins to operate automatically long after it's no longer necessary. So now, in your adult life, you may find yourself repeating behaviors that don't truly align with who you are, but feel impossible to break. Not because you're weak, but because you're still playing a role that once helped you survive. And until you recognize it, it will keep shaping your reality from behind the scenes. What if one honest question could reveal the version of you that has been quietly shaping your entire life? Not the version you present, not the one you aspire to become, but the one that was formed in moments where love felt conditional, where acceptance required adjustment, where being yourself didn't feel like enough. So here's the question. Who did you have to become to be loved?
Take a moment with that.
Not intellectually, but honestly. Because somewhere in your past there was a silent agreement, a moment where you learned, if I act this way, I'm accepted. If I express this, I'm safe. If I hide this part of me, I belong. And from that moment on, you began shaping yourself around that agreement. Maybe you became more agreeable, even when you disagreed. Maybe you became more independent, even when you needed support. Maybe you became more controlled, more perfect, more quiet, more strong. But none of these were random traits. They were adaptations. And over time, those adaptations became so practiced, so familiar, that they stopped feeling like choices. They became identity. This is the false self, not fake, not artificial, but constructed. A version of you built to navigate a world where being fully yourself didn't feel safe or certain. And the deeper truth is this: the life you experience today is still being filtered through that version. So if something feels off, if something feels constrained, it may not be your circumstances. It may be the identity that was created to survive them. What if the role you once needed is now the very thing limiting your life? At some point, that version of you, the one that adapted, that adjusted, that learned how to be accepted, became automatic. It stopped feeling like a response and started feeling like identity. And that's where it becomes invisible, because now you don't question it. You don't notice it. You simply live through it. It shows up in the way you communicate, the way you hesitate before expressing what you truly feel, the way you prioritize others while quietly abandoning yourself, the way you pursue goals that look right but don't feel aligned. And even when you recognize something isn't working, there's a subtle pull to return to what's familiar.
Why?
Because that role is not just a behavior, it's wired into your nervous system. It carries emotional memory. It carries the imprint of what once felt necessary for connection, safety, and belonging. So even when your conscious mind says, "I want something different," your system responds with, "But this is what kept us safe." And that creates an internal conflict. You try to change your actions, but the identity beneath them remains the same. You set new intentions, but the emotional patterns keep pulling you back. This is why transformation can feel slow, inconsistent, or even impossible. Not because you lack clarity, but because you're trying to build a new life on top of an old identity. And until that identity is seen clearly, it will continue to guide your choices in subtle, powerful ways. Even when you think you've moved beyond it, what if the version of you that feels so fixed is actually just a habit? Not your essence, not your truth, but something you've repeated so many times that it now feels permanent. Think about it. The way you respond to pressure, the way you interpret silence, the way you hold back, overextend, withdraw, or prove yourself. These patterns didn't appear overnight. They were practiced, repeated reactions, reinforced emotions. Consistent ways of being that over time became familiar and then automatic. But here's the shift most people never allow themselves to see. Repetition creates identity, but it does not define it. You are not your patterns. You are the one who has been practicing them. And anything that has been practiced can be practiced differently. This is where something begins to loosen. Because instead of seeing yourself as "this is just who I am," you begin to see, "this is what I've been rehearsing." And that changes everything. Because now there is space between you and the pattern. Space to observe it. Space to question it. Space to interrupt it. Not by force. Not by resistance. But by awareness. When you see a reaction arise and recognize it as familiar rather than true, something shifts. You are no longer fully identified with it. And in that moment, even if nothing changes externally, internally, you are no longer the same, because you've stopped believing that the pattern is you. And that is where real transformation begins. Not by becoming someone new, but by realizing you never were what you thought. What if there was a single skill that could interrupt years of conditioning, not gradually, but in real time? Not by rewriting your past, not by forcing new behaviors, but by changing the way you relate to what is happening inside you right now. That skill is observation without identification. Most people don't realize this, but the moment a thought appears, they merge with it. The moment an emotion arises, they become it. I am anxious. I am not ready. This always happens to me. And in that instant, the pattern takes control, not because it's powerful, but because it is believed. But what happens if, instead of merging with a thought, you simply notice it? What happens if, instead of saying, "This is me," you recognize, "This is a pattern moving through me"? Something subtle begins to shift. You create space. And in that space, your identity is no longer locked into the reaction. You are no longer inside the pattern, you are aware of it. This is where the old identity begins to lose its grip, because identity is sustained by unconscious repetition. But the moment something becomes conscious, it can no longer operate the same way. You don't need to fight the pattern. You don't need to eliminate it. You only need to see it clearly without attaching to it. And in that moment, something powerful happens. You move from reaction to choice, from autopilot to awareness. And that shift, even if it lasts only seconds, begins to rewire everything. Because now, for the first time, you are no longer becoming the pattern. You are witnessing it. What if your power has never been in controlling what happens, but in how you respond to it? Most people believe their reactions are natural, automatic, justified. If something triggers you, you react. If something feels uncomfortable, you respond. It seems almost instinctive, as if there is no space between the event and your response. But what if that space exists and you've just never been shown how to access it? Every reaction is a continuation of identity. The moment something happens, your nervous system scans it, compares it to past experiences, and delivers a familiar emotional response. And without awareness, you follow it. Instantly, repeatedly. But when you begin to observe instead of react, something subtle begins to shift. You pause, not to suppress, not to control, but to witness. And in that pause, you interrupt the automatic chain. The event no longer leads directly to the reaction. There is space. And in that space, there is something you may not have felt before. Freedom. Because detachment is not indifference. It is clarity. It's the ability to experience something without becoming consumed by it. To feel an emotion without being defined by it. To see a pattern without stepping into it. And this is where your identity begins to dissolve. Not through effort, not through force, but through non-participation. You stop feeding the pattern with your reaction. And when the pattern is no longer reinforced, it begins to weaken. This is the quiet shift most people overlook. But once you experience it, you can never go back to reacting the same way again. What if real transformation doesn't look the way you expect it to? Most people wait for external proof. A new opportunity, a different result, a visible shift in their environment that confirms something has changed. But what if the first and most important evidence appears somewhere else entirely? What if it appears within you? Because the earliest sign of change is not what happens outside. It's how you respond to what used to trigger you. The same situation arises. The same type of conversation. The same emotional pattern begins to surface. But this time, something feels different. You notice it faster. You don't get pulled in as deeply. The reaction that once felt automatic now feels optional. And even if the external circumstances haven't changed yet, your internal experience has. This is the moment most people overlook because it doesn't feel dramatic. It doesn't look like a breakthrough. It feels subtle, almost quiet, but it's everything. Because reality does not shift the moment you decide to change. It begins to shift the moment you embody something different. And embodiment starts internally. When your emotional responses begin to change, your perception changes. When your perception changes, your decisions change. And when your decisions change, your reality has no choice but to follow. So instead of asking, why hasn't my life changed yet? Ask yourself, am I responding differently than I used to? Because if the answer is yes, then the shift has already begun. What if everything begins to move the moment you stop trying to control how it happens?
Control feels safe.
It gives you the illusion that if you plan enough, think enough, anticipate enough, you can guarantee an outcome. But beneath that need to control, there is often something deeper. Fear of uncertainty, fear of loss, fear of not being enough if things don't go as expected. And that fear subtly shapes the way you show up. You tighten your grip. You overanalyze. You try to predict every step. And in doing so, you close yourself off to the very thing that allows life to expand, flow. Flow is not passive. It is not about doing nothing or waiting for life to happen. It is a state of deep alignment, where your actions are guided not by pressure, but by clarity, where you respond to what is present instead of trying to force what is not. In a state of flow, your energy opens. You become more receptive, more aware, more attuned to subtle opportunities that control would have overlooked. You begin to act from trust instead of urgency. And this is where reality responds differently. Because when you release the need to control every detail, you allow space for something greater than your current perspective to organize outcomes. You move from trying to manage life to cooperating with it. This is the shift. From contraction to expansion. From tension to movement. From control to flow. And once you experience it, you begin to realize life was never meant to be forced. It was meant to be allowed. What if there is a specific moment each day when change becomes easier, faster, and more natural? Not because you're trying harder, but because your mind is more open. Most of your day is lived in a state of repetition. Your brain operates in familiar patterns, reinforcing the same thoughts, the same emotional responses, the same identity. This is efficient, but it also keeps you locked in what you already know. But there are brief windows where that structure softens. Moments when your conscious mind relaxes and your subconscious becomes more accessible. This is often when you're just waking up or just about to fall asleep. In these states, your brain shifts into slower frequencies, what is often referred to as the theta state. And in this state, something important happens. The barrier between who you've been and who you can become becomes more flexible. Your mind is less analytical, less resistant, more receptive. This is why thoughts and images in these moments can feel more vivid, more emotional, more real. And because the subconscious responds not to logic, but to feeling and repetition, this becomes a powerful point of influence. So instead of trying to force change during the day when your identity is most active, what if you began to plant new impressions when your system is most open? Not by effort, but by intention. By allowing yourself to feel, even briefly, what it would be like to exist beyond your current patterns. Because in that window, you are not just thinking differently, you are becoming available to something new. What if the most powerful shift you could make is to stop trying to be anything at all? At first, this idea can feel confusing, almost unsettling, because your entire life has been built around becoming better, becoming more successful, becoming someone who finally arrives. But what if this constant effort to become is what keeps you identified with what you are not? To become nothing does not mean losing yourself. It means releasing everything you've been holding on to as who you are. The roles, the labels, the stories, the emotional patterns that feel so personal, yet are simply repeated experiences shaped into identity. When you let go of these attachments, even briefly, you enter a different state. A state where you are no longer defined by your past, no longer reacting from memory, no longer projecting yourself into the future. You become present, fully. And in that presence, something extraordinary happens. You are no longer broadcasting a fixed identity. You are open. In quantum terms, you shift from a collapsed state where everything is defined and predictable into a field of possibility, where outcomes are not predetermined by who you think you are, but influenced by the energy you embody in the present moment. This is why people describe this state as emptiness and, at the same time, fullness. Because when you are no longer attached to a limited version of yourself, you are connected to everything beyond it. And from that space, creation becomes effortless. What if everything you've been chasing has been waiting for the moment you stop chasing it? Not because desire is wrong, not because goals don't matter, but because the energy behind the chase has been rooted in one quiet assumption: it's not here yet. And as long as that assumption drives your actions, your reality continues to mirror it. But something shifts the moment you stop trying to become. Not in a passive way, not in a way that gives up on what you want, but in a deeper, more grounded way, where you no longer move from lack, but from presence. You begin to act without needing the outcome to validate you. You express without filtering yourself through fear. You make decisions from clarity instead of urgency. And in that state, something remarkable happens. You become coherent. Your thoughts, your emotions, your energy, and your actions begin to align. There is no longer a gap between what you say you want and how you show up. And reality responds to that coherence. Opportunities appear, not because they suddenly exist, but because you are now able to see and receive them. People respond differently, not because they've changed, but because your energy no longer asks for approval. You are no longer trying to get. You are available to receive. This is the closing of the loop. Everything you want was never blocked by reality. It was filtered through identity. And the moment you release the need to become, you return to what you've always been. And from that place, everything begins to come. If this shifted something inside you, don't let it stay as just a moment of insight. Subscribe to the channel and follow for more content like this. Like the video if it resonated with you, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today.